I'm Christopher Harding.
And I'm Will Wilkinson. You're listening to Thriving in Business and Life.
And we're going to follow up on the program we were doing last week where we were talking about the genius of inclusion. And if you didn't catch that, dive back and catch that on our program list there, because we really covered some of the traditional and basic elements of inclusion and some of our tips as well.
Well, and I love both those words, the genius of inclusion. Inclusion, going beyond our comfort zone to include others in ways that we wouldn't normally,
right,
and not even be aware that we were excluding them. And then genius, applying that to the results of being inclusive. Love that frame.
Yeah, and one of the things we talked about was how, the genius of inclusion, the reason we use that is inclusion really helps us to tap into the full intelligence of a group, to make sure that we're getting the best results possible and getting, tapping into the group mind, you could say, to make the best decisions possible.
Well, and as we've said, it's an entirely different chemistry. Often teams are like a bunch of individuals.
Right.
And there's
right.
competition and there's envy and there's blocking others' ideas. This is a completely different paradigm of mining, as we say, the genius of the group.
Yeah, and one of the things we're going to jump into today, which is so far that I've found a very different approach to inclusion than I've yet heard used, and that is, we kind of teased this last week and said we were going to be talking about the L word.
Right, which I'm not sure which L word listeners would go to.
Well, we're talking about love.
Right, we're daring to talk about love.
And it's interesting because what we're talking about, and we explored this in the introduction of our book as well, that we're talking about love not in a romantic sense, but in a real powerful passion of valuing and respecting and really, loving on people, because we found that it actually has a real impact on how a group coalesces, collaborates, and how individuals function.
Yeah, I think the simplest way to understand our use of the word love is just to attach it to well-known phrases like love your life.
Right.
Or love your job, love what you're doing. They say that the most fortunate person is that person who finds a job, a career that they love. So that every day they're doing what they love.
I've shared, I think, on this program before, my father's advice to me when I was getting ready to go to college. And I said, how do I know what career path to choose? And he said, decide what you would love to do even if you didn't get paid, and make that your career. Because if you do, you'll love going to work every day.
Well, what great advice. And I've learned that when I apply that, I increase my ability to love what I'm doing. So it isn't just that what I'm doing is lovable, it's my choice to love it.
Exactly. And so as we talk about that in regard to inclusion, what we're talking about is, if I'm a manager or a people leader in some way, am I able to, first of all, help people find their passion within their job, to really to love it, find out what is it about the job they love, and see if I can give them more of that as an opportunity. But it's also to be able to reflect back to them their value, to basically find a way to, have them feel the love from me, from the company, from the team. And I, as I was introducing this one time in a training, you can imagine that some leaders are going like, "Where's he going with this?" And one person said, "Well, why would I possibly want to convey love to my people? I mean, why would I do that?"
Right.
And the answer is simple: because it works.
Exactly, it gets results.
Yeah.
The other aspect of this too is that it presumes a purpose for what we're doing. And that's maybe seems self-evident, but I heard a speaker the other day say something I thought was very profound, simple but profound. Nothing comes to you that is not your destiny.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, so
I mean, that might be a story, but I like it.
Yeah, I mean, just as a way of looking at things. So we're in a job, we have a job, and it's not our perfect job. But if it came to us, if we came to it, there's a reason for that.
Well, yeah. So what it'd be like, well, so what's the opportunity in this situation? How can I find a way to find something about this to love?
Exactly. Being an opportunist.
Right, and we've talked about infusing your values into everything you do. So if you're a people leader, if you're managing people, how is it that you can really kind of show your love and appreciation for them? Because if you do, it also gives them a chance to really find more about their job that they love.
Well, exactly. And whenever I talk about appreciation, I always take a moment to define it because it's one of those words we think we understand, but we may not fully. We understand depreciation.
Right.
Our cars do that, and equipment depreciates, meaning it loses value. Appreciation is the opposite, it's increasing value. So when I appreciate you or I appreciate my job, I'm actually increasing value.
Yeah, yeah, infusing value into it. We're going to get into the brain science around this later, but one of the things I wanted to do was have you share a story that you shared in the book, actually, about a guy who was not exactly the kind of person who would bring love to his job, but when he began to, he got surprised with the outcome.
It's a great story, and if I hadn't been there to hear it firsthand, I think I'd relegate it to the urban myth bin.
Right.
This really happened, and I interviewed this gentleman for a book I wrote about 5 years ago, and he's a tough guy, and I got to say one of the crudest people I've ever met. He's now a stockbroker, multimillionaire, successful guy. But the story he told me went back to his early days as a Texas oil man.
Mm.
And he had a young company, and they were on the eve of their biggest deal yet, and they needed the deal to survive. Well, he found out on the evening before going into the big meeting that they were going to be turned down.
Oh, jeez,
Right.
Yeah.
Now, he became furious, and he began plotting a strategy, which was basically to bully and use profanity and force to try and get his way.
So when all else fails, coerce.
Exactly. And no, you don't even wait for all else to fail. Just start
coerce.
there.
Yeah.
This was his style. However, he had recently begun meditating, which I don't know why he thought to do that. It seemed very unlikely. Maybe just he had high blood pressure or something. He respected his meditation teacher enough to call him and ask him for his opinion. Well, he got clear instructions. His teacher said, okay, go to the meeting early. Be the first one there. As people come in, greet every one of them, look in their eyes, and think, I love you. I don't need anything from you.
This is great. I can just imagine what's going on in his mind as he hears this.
At this point, he relapsed into profanity-laden expletives. Anyway, he clearly thought this was the worst idea he'd ever heard. However, I guess he figured he had nothing to lose, and he did, as I said, respect his teachers, so he tried it out. Fascinating to hear him tell what happened. He's in there. The first guy comes in, he looks him in the eye, and he thinks, I love you. I don't need anything from you.
So he's not saying this out loud, but he's thinking it as he greets the person, right?
He's saying it in his head very reluctantly. And then the second one came in. He told me by, I think it was the third person he said this to, that he began to feel different inside himself. And I guess there were quite a few people who came in, and he did this with everyone. He said he was in tears. He was fighting back tears just from expressing love, silently towards these people. So that's part one of the story. Part two, they're sitting there, and sure enough, the spokesperson for the other company said, well, thank you for your kind offer. We've decided to decline. Well, this would normally have been ignition point. And instead, much to the complete shock of his teammates, this guy found himself saying, well, we appreciate your decision. We do think we can add value to your company. I have a counter proposal. My colleagues and I will leave the room. We'd like you to think about retaining us, and we will waive our fee.
Wow.
We'd like to prove ourselves to you, so we'll work not for the 10% we asked for, but for nothing, just until you see if we have value to you or not. Well, Everybody's stunned.
Yes, his colleagues are like, "What the heck is he doing?"
Well, they've known him for years.
Yeah.
They've wondered if, he's someone else masquerading as him, right? And of course, everybody is shocked by this, highly unusual offer. Anyway, they consented, so the team left, and of course, they harangued him outside. What the hell are you doing? Well, pretty quickly, they brought them back in and said, well, thank you for your unusual offer. We can't accept it. We would like to retain you at 15% because we've never heard such an expression of integrity.
So their original offer would have been 10.
And so they upped it to 15 on a trial basis. And this gentleman told me that they did business for about a decade, and they became very close. They attended each other's children's birthday parties, and they made millions of dollars together. And it all came from that decision to be loving.
Well, that's a great lead-in to kind of the science behind this, because there's a wonderful book out there. If you haven't read the book Love 2.0 by Barbara Fredrickson, it's a great one because she really gets into the details of brain science and describes what happens physiologically when somebody is emoting, or you could say transmitting, a loving energy. And part of what happens is the brain starts to light up. It actually becomes more of a whole-brained, functioning instrument. Mm. And in addition to that, as the Heart Math Institute has discovered, the heart brain also starts to light up. Mm-hmm. So if you're not aware of it, they've discovered that the heart actually has brain cells and sends signals to the brain as well as receives signals from the brain.
Well, this is quite an insight for most of us who think the brain lives in the head.
Right.
And actually it permeates the entire body, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's a gut brain. They're now discovering that there's a heart brain, that really the cells are all transmitting, signals. And so this whole idea of emoting love or transmitting love to people can literally change how they experience us because of the phenomenon called mirror neurons, right? Mm-hmm. So if I'm emulating love towards somebody, what's going to happen is that same feeling is going to be triggered in them because of their mirror neurons. And so, if I want my people functioning at their best, and I'm emulating love and appreciation and respect for them, they'll feel that. Mm-hmm. And their body will actually, without them even thinking about it, start to have a similar response. Unless they really are, traumatized or have a lot of challenges going on.
Well, another term for this phenomena is entrainment.
Right.
And that's customary with, for instance, sitting with a highly evolved spiritual person. Someone goes to visit a guru in India, and just being in their presence, they feel something.
Yeah.
They're feeling the tangibility of love.
Well, and I think we've all probably had the experience where somebody walks into a room and the entire room notices them come in, and the whole tone and tenor of the room shifts. Sometimes in really positive ways, sometimes in what seems to be counterproductive or negative ways.
Right.
And so, I think we underestimate the impact we can have, especially in leadership roles.
Well, for those listeners who've read Power versus Force by David Hawkins, you'll be familiar with his calibration done over 30 years of experiments with thousands of people to actually put numbers on the frequency that we're expressing through our consciousness. He created this map of consciousness. And the relevant point is that loving thoughts are far more powerful than hateful ones. So when we are being loving at work and with our family, we're actually counterbalancing a lot of negativity.
As we're thinking about this, I don't think I shared this story in the book. I might have shared it on our program at one point. But I'm reflecting back on, during a workshop I was giving back in New York, I had a woman come up to me at the break, and she shared a story with me, and I'll shorten it here. But basically, she was leaving the symphony one night, and she was walking to her car. She'd parked a ways away from the symphony hall. And she noticed two younger men across the street looking at her and conversing. And she said she could just feel that something was out of sorts with these two men. And one of them started across the street toward her, and she thought to herself, this could be my last moment.
Wow.
She realized that, she could be mugged or worse. And so she thought to herself, if this is my last moment, I want to go out with love.
Mm.
And so as the young man approached her, looking kind of scowling and, kind of probably working up his courage to do what he was planning on doing, she smiled at him and said, good evening, young man. What can I do to help you?
Oh, wow. How disarming is that?
And he kind of stopped him in his tracks a
Yeah,
bit.
yeah.
And he was kind of speechless. And she said, is there something you need from me? Because whatever I have is yours if you're in need.
That's remarkable.
And she said she was just, trying to emulate love to him.
Mm-hmm.
And he stopped and came over to her and said, ma'am, this isn't a safe neighborhood. I need to get you out of here. And as he
Really?
walked her to her
Really?
car, he confessed to her that he was planning on slitting her throat and taking her purse.
He confessed that to her?
Yeah.
Holy cow.
And that he, somehow couldn't understand why he was walking her to her car, but said, you shouldn't be here alone at night.
He became her protector.
Yeah. And, she just told him, how much she appreciated it and how much she loved him and what a good soul he was, and he's like shocked. And
Yeah.
as she drives away, he's just standing in the street watching her drive away with this almost dumbfounded look on his face.
It's a remarkable story, and it would be fascinating to be able to pick up on that young man and find out if that was a turning point in his life.
Yeah, you would think so, right?
It has all the feelings of that.
Yeah, it does. And so we were talking about this topic in the workshop, and so, she was saying, I just want you to know that I've had a profound experience that this power of love
Mm-hmm.
definitely has the ability to change people and bring them to their best self, is how she described it.
Well, I don't think I told this story in the book either. We're going to have to write another book and put these good stories in there. A girlfriend of mine back in my 20s told me of an event. She was hitchhiking in the summer and got picked up by a truck driver who proceeded to, act pretty strange and then drive down a side road.
Mm,
And she could see what was about to happen.
wow.
And she was terrified. She was 20-something, very pretty. And so she started talking to him. She said, no, you're not going to rape me. A good-looking guy like you must have lots of girlfriends. And she just kept piling on the appreciation. And he just sat there and he started to cry.
Mm,
And he confessed that, no, he was actually very lonely. And he became embarrassed. He apologized for, whatever he was thinking of doing. And he ended up driving her to where she needed to go. And out she went, safe and sound. Same idea.
yeah. Well, it's so fortunately, in most of our jobs, we're not dealing with life and death situations, but we are dealing with people's engagement, their commitment, their moods. And one of the things that has been brought out in a variety of research, and I think Barbara Fredrickson talks about this in Love 2.0 as well. What love does, however, is when somebody's in an amygdala hijack, as they call it, when the amygdala basically takes the brain's energy and decides to go into that mode, is love has the ability, when expressed and felt, to restore the brain to its whole brain function.
Mm.
And so, you think about what are the things that create amygdala hijacks for people in the work environment.
Well, I love that term. And I'd love you to unbundle it a little bit for our listeners. What is an amygdala hijack? Give us an example of that.
So, real simple one. We describe in the book, and we talked about it last week, a meeting where a woman who was an executive assistant speaks up in the meeting. And in the meeting, she offers a solution that nobody had yet thought of.
Mm-hmm.
And immediately gets shut down by somebody who suggests that how could somebody of her station in life possibly come up with a solution for this? Well, so in her shame and embarrassment, she shuts down,
Right.
goes into the freeze or faint mode, and doesn't say anything, doesn't respond, just totally shuts down. that's, you could say, the brain's way of trying to protect her, right? It goes into that state, and she's just completely shut down until somebody else in the room goes, "Hey, hang on a minute.
Mm-hmm.
I want to hear what she had to say. It sounded like a really interesting idea," and turns to her and says, "Tell us more about this."
Well, is it fair to say that she went into a kind of shock?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because her system kind of shut down almost.
Yeah, and the opposite could be true. Somebody says something, less than flattering, and you get defensive and come right back and attack them back. Right? That's the fight reaction.
Right.
So that amygdala hijack is basically what happens when the brain goes into defensive mode, which might be fighting or fleeing.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and so that's the thing that, you think about this woman with this person who was coming across the street to slit her throat and take her purse.
Mm.
She really basically moved him out of an amygdala hijack. I mean, you don't do what he was about to do with the whole brain thinking, right? And with his heart brain fully engaged.
So she actually shifted his brain function.
Yeah. By shifting hers, instead of her allowing herself to go to an amygdala hijack, which could have been to faint, to run, to scream, to do whatever she might have done, she kept herself in full brain thinking, engaged her heart brain, and really emulated love towards this young man. And as you said, entrainment. And they've shown this now with brain waves and heart waves. Her emulation of love was strong enough to where it literally triggered the similar waveform in him. And he was literally moved to a different state of being.
Well, it's interesting to consider this in a simple way. Who's going to entrain who?
Right.
Because he was trying to entrain her into fear and terror and submission.
Right.
But she was able to entrain him into friendship and protection.
Yeah. And that's a really great question. Who's going to entrain who? Right? So you're in a meeting, let's say, and somebody is really down on a situation and they're being very negative. Now, one thing could be to really come down on them, which is the same, vibe, you could say. Or the other thing would be to really listen to them and say, it sounds like you've got some real genuine concerns here. Let's listen to this and then consider it in the bigger scope of things.
I call that communication poker. Anyone who's played poker knows the phrase, "I'll see you and raise you." You see a bet and you raise.
Right.
So in this sense, it's like, well, I see you, I hear what you're saying, and I raise you. In other words, I'm raising to a higher level, love rather than hate. It's an interesting way to see it.
It is. Yeah, I like that. And it's, how are you going to play the hand you're dealt, right?
Exactly.
There's an old, wisdom saying that says, fate is the hand you're dealt, destiny is what you do with it.
Exactly.
Right?
How you play your cards.
Yeah. And so, that's the encouragement as we're working with leaders and managers, is as they sit down with their people, if your people know that you genuinely care about them, you see them as human beings, you're concerned about their well-being, you're excited for their success, you're concerned when they're struggling, that creates a whole different level of rapport that not only is measurable with brain scans and heart scans and so forth, but in the actual results of how engaged people are, how willing they are to contribute at their fullest.
Chris, you've had such a full career over the years of consulting in fairly large corporations, and I know you've included stories in our book, but I'd love to hear any kind of story about the long-term benefits of this. A situation, say, where you went in and you helped people understand this principle, and something that was not working turned around and began to work because of someone in the company choosing to express in a more loving way. Can you recall any instances?
Well, as you were saying,
I'm putting you on the spot here.
One came to mind as we were talking. So there was a company down in Texas that was.
We're back to Texas again.
That was a very notable company, and they had us come in because they were really looking to create a more inclusive environment that was more collaborative and so on. And I can remember going into the first, I'd done some coaching and consulting, and I was in the first actual training session we were doing, and they started us out with, what they considered to be a group that was having trouble.
Mm.
So, just in introducing the topic of the genius of inclusion, as we kind of went around the room and I got a read for, what would you like to get out of the session today and so forth, we get around to about the fifth guy. It's kind of a tough-looking guy, one of those people that's can really emulate a lot of energy. And he goes, well, first of all, I just want to say that I think this whole thing is total horseshit.
Great.
Right?
And you as a facilitator go, oh, terrific.
Yeah, so I said, he introduced himself, and I just said, well, Terry, that's the level of honesty we're looking for today. So thank you for modeling that. Everybody else, let's make sure we're being real today.
Wow, perfect.
And I could see that it caught him off guard, and you could see everybody else kind of doing like, what?
Sure.
Well, we had a fairly interesting session. He was a little bit combative is probably too strong a word, but not too far from that as the morning proceeded. We took a break, and I made a point to catch him out in the, outside the break room where everybody was meeting. And I said, how are you doing? And he said, I'm fine. I don't have any problem. You're talking about biases. I don't have any biases. I leave my biases at the door when I come in. Mm. And I said, really? And he was like, yeah. And I said, so that's what that looks like when your biases are left at the door? Now, this is a tough guy, could have easily broke my neck in a heartbeat, And he looks at me, and I could see that he was torqued at first. And I just looked at him with a smile on my face, and he finally smiled and went, yeah, God, you're right. I really did bring that in, didn't I? Mm. And I said, Terry, let me tell you something. I can see you're an influencer. You're an influential leader, regardless of your formal position. All I'm interested in is having you and your group care about each other more, love on each other more, and make this a place where people love to come, since you're going to spend 8 to 10 hours a day here.
Right.
That's all I'm after, And
did he get it?
He got it.
Wow.
He got it. And so we get back into the room, and I said something as the group reassembled, and somebody kind of smarted off. And he turned around and said, hey, this guy knows what he's talking about. Let's give him our respect.
Wow.
So the whole rest of that session went well. But what also happened, because he got it, is he became probably the number one advocate for creating that kind of genius of inclusion, loving, caring environment within the entire plant.
That sounds like a real conversion.
Yeah. And
he was blind, and then he saw.
Well, and it's hard.
I hear the strains of Amazing Grace in the background here.
Yeah, exactly. And I was as surprised as anybody at that turnabout. All I knew how to do was meet him with honesty and genuinely caring about him and inviting him into a better place. Mm-hmm. And he seemed to be game,
Well, you're reminding me of a personal incident in the same vein, coaching a couple who'd been married for 30 years. And it ended up being very profound because of one thing that I said.
What was it?
And it just came out spontaneously. I said, well, to start with, you're on the same side, right?
Right, yeah.
And they looked at me and they almost fell over because they realized they had taken adversarial positions. So inclusion for them, our topic today is the genius of inclusion, was as simple as realizing they were on the same side.
Well, as we're running out of time here, a lot of great things to reflect on, I know, for us, just as we contemplate these stories. So the opportunity we invite you to take on is just as you're going throughout your day, whether at work or at home, is see what happens when you emulate love to the people around you. What happens to you and what happens to them.
All right. Well, terrific show, Chris. I'm Will Wilkinson.
And I'm Christopher Harding, and you can send your comments to thrivinginbusinessandlife@gmail.com. And that's it, Will.
See you next week.